the lady on the back there.
I was just wondering if you thought that there was a solution to overcoming these ideologies, and if so, how do we do so without engaging in some sort of counter-censorship with, as you said, you know, academia or other?
I thought somewhat about the question you posed. I think the answer is history, history, history. These are the symptoms of an historically ignorant society that has almost no knowledge. You can see it with Iraq when people say this is the worst fill in the blanks, fiasco, mistake, blunder in our entire history. It struck to me, I just got back from leading a group to battlefields in Europe. How could the United States have planned the Normandy invasion and lost almost 730 people in training exercise up near Scotland? Nobody knew about it, by a German speedboat that went in. How could you marshal yourself in such a way that you had a brilliant, successful invasion where you knew the grains of sand, the direction of the water current, the air temperature, and then nobody asked a simple question: how do you get through the bocage? And then for the next 7 weeks, you lost 80,000 American dead and wounded, and you went almost 4 miles, and probably the biggest blunder of that war. And how could you try to break out during the Cobra offensive and use B-17s and bomb your own people because they flew perpendicular rather than parallel? Then in a burst of acrimony, say you're going to do it again, and then do it again and bomb 3 days later and killed more Americans, including a 3-star General McNair, and then have a private censored funeral where nobody would know about it. This is what this country had to do. It's made blunders that made the lack of up-armored Humvees seem ridiculous. But I think what the answer to that is that we, for all our talk about the mortgage crisis and fuel prices, by any definition, we can be as mundane, as petty as one would want. Square footage for the individual, number of material appurtenances, longevity. We are the most privileged generation in the history of not just America, but Western society. And out of that, if history is any guide, there becomes a certain mentality that we're sort of like the proverbial, I grew up on a farm, we're like the proverbial picker in a plum orchard that always goes for the plum out of reach that's shiny and then lets rot the one right before him. This overreach, this utopian notion that we can have no bad choices, that war is not between bad and worse, but simply between always better or perfection. And so then we tear and demonize and destroy our leaders who make mistakes that by any historical barometer don't even pale in comparison to something in the past. I could sum it all up by historical ignorance. History is the most important of all disciplines, and yet look at one of our presidential candidates when he was asked about education. What did Mr. Obama say? We need more oppression studies, more stories of, and then he named about 6 particular victim groups. That's exactly what we don't need. We need more history.
Take one last question, actually.
Yes.
Gentleman in the front row.
Al Milliken, Washington Independent Writers. Do you think in the selling or the preparation of the war on terror to move into Iraq, the Bush administration emphasized enough the fact that Saddam Hussein was paying and supporting the surviving families of suicide bombing terrorists? I know, I heard from Muslims that that was a tremendous debate, I mean, among all types of Muslims, whether that kind of support was appropriate among Muslims. But I think, don't you think that from the United States viewpoint, they should have strongly emphasized that and even perhaps made that the major emphasis for the motivation to go to war?
Yes. Not only do I agree with you, but I wrote something in the National Review Corner today, and I used the word, I made that argument ad nauseum, because not long ago I made that argument and somebody wrote me 2 letters ad nauseum, meaning, okay, we heard it already. But the point is that of all the supposed lapses of the Bush administration, every one of them in some sense was a judgment call. When you get into Iraq, should you have more troops or less troops? Remember, the people said that we should have had more people who wrote books about the first Gulf War saying the Pentagon always exaggerates the threat, we put too many in. These were all judgment calls. Disband the Republican Army, you might get chaos, keep it, and you might get Ba'athist entrenched. But there was one lapse, and I think it's what you're alluding to, that was absolutely, clearly a mistake. And that was in the run-up to the war, contrary to popular journalistic opinion now. We didn't rush to war. We had 9 months of discussion. We went to the United Nations. But most importantly, on October 11th and 12th of 2002, the Congress, especially the Senate, but also the House of Representatives, gave the President a gift, so to speak, and gave us, the American people, a gift. They voted for 23 writs of authorizations, I should say, to go to war. One of them, as you said, was the subsidies of $20,000 for suicide bombers that were attacking the Israelis. But another one was the carnage inflicted against the Kurds. There was mention of the Shia. There was the oil for food. There was one of the great speeches, remember, was Harry Reid's when he said, "This is academic. They broke the 91 Accords. We're in a de facto state of war." There was the difficulty of the no-fly zones. There was the attempt to kill George Bush. They haven't changed. WMD may have changed and may have been a mistake, but the other 20-something haven't changed. If the administration had just said, we're going to go to war because the Senate in their infinite wisdom has outlined a case for war that's overwhelming, that's predicated on 23 principles, then when one principle had misled them, they wouldn't have been in the jam that they're in. They would have had legitimacy. But once all that WMD did was it allowed people in age-old fashion. Remember what people are like. They have no, I mean, we're pretty reprehensible species. We have no strong views. 20% wanted to go to war, 20% did not want to go to war. 20% wanted in 1861 to go to war, 20%, but the great majority of people predicate their political views on the pulse of the battlefield. That's why if I wanted to embarrass pundits this day, I could take 10 pundits at random and suggest that for all their anti-war opposition, they have written strong editorials at some point in 2001 to 2003 about going into Iraq, and I suggest that if the thing calms down, there's a constitutional government. Maliki gives a great thank you speech to the Senate. They will come around and say that they were always for the war. That's what people do. But what the problem is that when the president predicated, or I'm not suggesting it was him, but his staff or he or the administration, when they predicated all their eggs in one basket on WMD, and that did not turn up, that was a get out of jail card, so to speak. It was a way of people, when the insurgency started, to abandon the cause. They can say Bush lied, thousands died. They could not have said Bush lied, thousands died if he had said, wait a minute, we're here because this man tried to kill my former president. This man has destroyed the Shias. This man tried to practice Holocaust. This man broke the 91 Accords. This man destroyed the ecology of the Marsh Arabs. This man was giving bounties to suicide bombers, et cetera, et cetera. This man had a $50 billion oil for food. So yeah, I think that would really hurt the cause in Iraq. And the odd thing about it is that the brilliance of General Petraeus and what we've accomplished so far, you're starting to see these other issues that why we went to war being addressed. We're starting to address the Marsh Arabs. We are addressing the freedom and security of the Kurds by the very fact that a constitutional system seems to be legitimate and seems to be working. The greatest irony of all is that the original 23 reasons that we went to a war will be solved by the success of the Maliki government, but yet it's fallen on deaf ears. WMD became the narrative. You win or lose by that narrative, and unfortunately it had terrible effects on public opinion, and especially to the poor soldiers who were over there when this radical change of opinion took place and they were sort of orphaned. Talked too long. Thank you very much.
Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributor to National Review magazine. He is the author of A War Like No Other and Mexifornia. For more information, visit victorhanson.com.